Chapter 13, Year 5, Part 3. It was quiet. It was always so damn quiet at Grimmauld Place these days. Harry frowned as he looked out of the library window. Snowflakes twirled in the air, illuminated by street lamps, and the winter scenery seemed deceptively idyllic, peaceful. The house was anything but. The time of rage and mutual accusations had stormed by, culminating in an awful Christmas dinner a week ago, and the silence that had descended upon the house instead had a deafening nails-on-a-chalkboard quality. The Weasleys were still there, because it was easier for them to stay in London to take care of the formalities regarding Mr. Weasley's death, but they tended to avoid everyone. Once Harry had built up the courage to knock on the door of the twins' room, despite not knowing what to say. They told him to fuck off, but he thought he'd have felt like an awful friend if he hadn't at least tried. Order members popped in and out occasionally, and Harry didn't know whether they were perpetually so discomfited these days, or the house affected them so, but those visits were rarely cheerful enough to dispel the persistent gloom. The tense atmosphere was getting to Harry, too. He tried to study like he'd done in the summer, but found himself unable to concentrate, and he didn't have the time for that sort of slacking off, but he didn't seem able to help it. He'd taken to wandering around the house in the hope to quell his restlessness. Last summer he'd failed to appreciate the way this house resembled a maze of dark corridors, all leading up to closed doors. He wished he'd gone to Neville's. Neville wrote, as did the others, and the letters provided the only breath of fresh air during this Christmas holiday. Blazes contained useful ministry gossip between irreverently humorous remarks. Terry waxed poetic about some theories Harry couldn't even pronounce, and Padma's had provoked Harry's annoyed response. He'd realized only after he'd sent it off that goading him into showing emotion had been Padma's very intention, and had nearly written another letter telling her that, if he didn't shout about what he felt on every corner, it didn't mean that he was having problems or anything. The most unexpected bit of correspondence, however, was one that had grown out of Harry's polite exchange of notes with Susan. They had started off with generic Christmas greetings, but then Susan had kept on writing to him, and Harry had continued replying. By now he was beginning to realize that he hadn't actually known anything about Susan when they'd gone on their date, except that she was blonde and pretty and had a nice smile. In retrospect, it was a startling thing to discover. God only knew what they had talked about during their date if Harry hadn't known until this correspondence who Susan's best friends were. Hannah Abbott, Ernie Macmillan and Justin Finch-Fletchley. Or what her favourite colour was, yellow. Or her favourite class, charms. He vaguely remembered that they'd done a lot of giggling and awkward hand-bumping, which was really rather embarrassing to think about. Harry's fingers tightened on the Susan's last letter in his pocket. She asked questions that were perfectly innocuous on the surface, but with Harry's life being what it was... "So where do you live? Is it true that your closest relatives are Muggles? What is it like? What is your house like?" As of this summer, Harry's living situation was a closely guarded secret, and Susan was trustworthy, but she wasn't this trustworthy. One careless word to her aunt, the mighty head of DMLE. Well, Harry would just have to lie. As far as the ministry knew, he was still living with the Dursleys, and Susan didn't have the security clearance to be told otherwise. Harry turned sharply away from the window and headed for the library door. His feet carried him into the same drawing-room he'd spent some time cleaning together with the Weasley children in the summer. It was significantly neater now, curtains doxy-free, cabinets lacking ominous objects, and even the tapestry on the wall looking fresher. Harry did a round of the room, mechanically stopping to look out of the window. Nothing new out there, and then wandered over to the genealogical tree of the House of Black. He'd studied it numerous times before, of course. He'd never acquired the pure-blood ease with remembering people's lineages, but he did try. Idly, Harry traced the golden threads connecting names together. The Bulstrodes were surprisingly close to the Blacks. The Diggories, on the other hand, were very far down the family line, and the Malfoys were a lot closer to the Blacks than they were to the Potters. Although, funny, Black had stated repeatedly that it would have been his responsibility to take care of Harry after his parents' death. Was that legally the case? And if so, did it mean that once Black had ended up in Azkaban, the responsibility to take care of Harry should have passed to Black's family? No, surely not. That would leave the Malfoys as Harry's closest magical relatives, and therefore his likeliest guardians should his case have gone to court. How likely was that? And yet, Harry frowned, stepping away from the tapestry. "Harry," Sirius Black's voice spoke up from the doorway. "What are you glaring at?" "Nothing," Harry murmured, still dwelling on the thought. Could the Dursleys have actually been the better option? Black approached Harry with light steps and stopped Mira. "Going stir-crazy, are you?" Black asked. "I know exactly how you feel. We're all shut up here, doing nothing." Startled by an oddly desperate note in the man's tone, Harry turned to regard him with more than just a cursory glance. He noticed with some surprise that Black looked somehow more haggard now than he had in the summer. Then again, he hadn't been out in the sun for how long now? "Yeah," Harry said, for once feeling vaguely sympathetic. "There has to be something we could do." Black nodded, then shrugged. "Dumbledore visited last night," he said, after a moment's silence. "Informed us that there's going to be a meeting tomorrow and we'll revise our strategy." Black grimaced. "Whatever the fuck that means. You're allowed to come, I suppose, if you like." Harry would very much like. This, that the Order was finally going to make new plans, was the best piece of news he'd heard all week, and to let the anticipation buoy him through yet another dinner the Weasley family had failed to attend. Harry's excitement did not last 20 minutes into the meeting. That is, truthfully, the plan didn't sound all that bad, but... "Headmaster," Lupin asked with a slight frown, "forgive me for questioning your judgment, but is it truly safe?" "Don't be daft, Lupin," Moody snapped, hijacking Dumbledore's response. "Potter won't even set foot in the Ministry. All he has to do is sign a form of requesting to listen to the prophecy, and that's it, the extent of his involvement. Want as much as break a nail." This was not, of course, what Harry was worried about, and Dumbledore probably knew it too, if the perceptive gleam in his eyes was anything to go by. "On the actual day, it'll be me who goes, Remus," Tonks said. "I'll metamorph into Harry, and they'll never know the difference until it's too late. The Death Eaters are not going to wait for me to pass the identification test at the Department of Mysteries. They'll be lying there in wait." "Yes, but what if they do wait for you to pass the test?" Lupin insisted. "Voldemort won't attack unless he's sure that it's Harry." "Or he might not attack at all," Black countered. "It's worth a shot anyway. What other chance do we have to draw Voldemort out? If he thinks Harry is going to access the prophecy, if he's not sure the prophecy is still going to be there when Harry leaves, Voldemort wants the prophecy too badly to let this get past him." "This is a plan that could work," Bill said, breaking his silence for the first time. "It could work, and it could be effective, and if we have to change the plan now, after Dad already died because the old one wasn't working—" Bill broke off abruptly, turning away, and Harry thought that the shouting matches with Percy affected him more than it appeared. Mrs. Weasley gave a loud sniffle. "It is only natural that you feel this way, William," Dumbledore said gravely, "and we shall certainly do all we can to make sure that Arthur's tragic death wasn't in vain." "We've let you know who laid down the rules for too long," Moody stated. "We've got to force him to react for once. We're not going to find a better bait than the prophecy and the threat of Potter removing it." Harry looked down at his hands, folded on the tabletop. The Order's plan hinged on the assumption that Voldemort would get alarmed should Harry lodge an official request to listen to the prophecy. As the only other person to whom it pertained, and who therefore had the right to access it, Harry was a good decoy, and Voldemort would definitely hear about the official request, the Ministry being the sieve that it was. If Voldemort thought Harry was on the Order's side and plotting with them to remove the prophecy out of his reach, then he might be provoked into attacking before Harry was due to appear, the date being set by the Department of Mysteries and likely to become known to him. Or else he could attack on the day itself, so as to take both Harry and the prophecy out in one blow. Except that Voldemort might not be so easily lured. As far as he knew, Harry wasn't on anyone's side. He was, in fact, waiting for Harry to choose one, and if Harry filed a request to listen to the prophecy, Voldemort might fail to take the bait. Or else he might regard it as a declaration of war and move on from Harry courting to Harry hunting, which was an even greater concern. It was too early for this. Harry didn't want to declare his intentions so soon. This was much too risky, and... "Harry," Kingsley Shacklebolt said, "what do you think?" "I think that this will severely limit my chances of appealing to the pro-Voldemort crowd," Harry imagined answering, "because Voldemort might get, offended if I scheme behind his back." Harry looked at the Order's members' expectant faces. Something told him it was not the best time for honesty. "I'm not sure," he demurred. "It just seems to me that it's a little transparent. Not that I presume to know better than everyone else, I'm just wondering. Voldemort is not stupid. He's going to know that I would never file an open request to listen to the prophecy. If I truly planned to go to the Ministry, I'd avoid shouting about it from the rooftops." "We will make a convincing show of covering it up," Tonks assured Harry. "We'll pretend that your form is top-secret classified." "And it's just our luck that dear Lucius has the Minister eating out of his hand, and so is privy to all state secrets," Black said darkly. "Still," Harry said, "I doubt Voldemort would believe that I'd be this overt." "And when would you know who have had the time to become such a good judge of your character?" Moody asked, both eyes boring into Harry. "He is not," Harry said calmly. "It's just common sense that—" "No, let's discuss this," Moody said, a touch of steel in his voice. "Do your doubts have anything to do with the interesting rumours I've been hearing about you and some offers you know who has been making you?" Harry's gaze darted to Dumbledore. He'd wondered why the Order had never brought up the recruitment attempt, and now it seemed that Snape had not told them. But Dumbledore surely knew. "What are you implying, Mad-Eye?" Black asked, beginning to rise from his seat. "Nothing yet," Moody said. His eyes were still fixed on Harry. "But if Potter doesn't answer—" "This is not the time for us to fight," Mrs. Weasley implored, looking frightened. "Alastair!" "I don't know what you're talking about, sir," Harry said, ignoring her outburst. "Alastair, you can't be implying that Harry would have anything to do with Voldemort," Lupin said firmly, as the other Order members watched wide-eyed. Except Dumbledore and Emmeline Vance. It was always hard to say what they were thinking. "Your paranoia is going too far, Mad-Eye," Black barked out a laugh. "This is Harry Potter you're talking about." Dumbledore raised a hand in a quelling gesture, cutting off Moody's impeding tirade. "I believe we have strayed from our original topic of discussion," the headmaster said. "Harry, I take it that you have no objections to the plan?" All faces turned to Harry, clearly waiting for him to say yes. Harry considered his choices. He could agree to sign the paperwork required for the Order's plan, and thereby publicly implicate himself in their schemes. Or else he could refuse to sign it, having no justifiable reason to do so, and alienate the Order, who might then investigate his connection to Voldemort, and cause all sorts of trouble. Rock, hard place. Tough pick. "It would behoove us to remove any potentially harmful equivocations," Dumbledore spoke up, looking at Harry seriously. "A man can court many only so long before he is mistrusted by all. We all must choose, and for what we fail to do now, the price will become dearer in the future." Harry frowned, ignoring the Order's confused glances between him and the headmaster. He had a feeling that he'd heard the same sentiment expressed differently by Blaise and Millie last semester, although he hadn't liked it then any more than now. "We all know that you'll declare a side, and take that to mean Zabini and I know what side it's going to be. However, the rest of the school isn't like us, and they might not know. Dumbledore was saying that the seeds of mistrust had already been sown, that Harry could only push so far before his reputation became irreparably damaged, and that a lot of people would be against Harry if they thought he was not with them. Harry looked around the room. Earlier, Black and Lupin had stood up for him against Moody's allegations. Others were silent. They were still silent. Were they waiting for Harry to prove his goodwill to them? Harry couldn't believe it, but Dumbledore was not an idiot, and neither were Blaise and Millicent, and evidence was right here before his eyes. He'd known from the start that the stakes were high in the deception game he was playing. He just hadn't counted on failing to notice when he started to lose. "Fine," he said somewhat fatalistically. "I'll sign the paperwork. I hope that the plan works out well." For all its inconvenience, it did sound like it might. Who knew? Maybe the Order would indeed manage to lure Voldemort out. Then the Ministry would be forced to accept his return and stop interfering at Hogwarts. At least one good thing could potentially come out of this mess. "Thank you, Harry," Dumbledore said, smiling at Harry approvingly. "Everyone else seems to be in agreement?" Discussions were held then, and concrete plans laid out, and adjustments made. Mrs. Weasley had to rush out of the room at the very idea that Bill would be going with the Order on a mission that would inevitably involve combat. Tonks was excited about her part, and participated eagerly in discussions on the logistics of switching her and Harry at Grimmauld Place before going to the Ministry. Black was adamant that he would go to the Ministry too. Lupin was equally determined that Black should stay at Grimmauld Place. Harry watched the proceedings, torn between returning excitement at the idea of the Order finally doing something, and morbid curiosity as to his own prospects. "Don't think you're in the clear, Potter," Moody said, catching Harry after the meeting. "The others might trust you, blindly, but your evasions aren't fooling me any." "I'm not sure what I've done to deserve your suspicion, sir," Harry said. He was even somewhat sincere. He and Moody had always seemed to get on well in the past. Moody eyed him shrewdly. "You're a clever lad, Potter," he said, "and one of the better ones, except that I've been catching some rotten whiffs of you lately, and you must have heard. I don't like dark wizards." I'm not asking you what you are," Moody said. "I'm just giving you a fair warning because I like you. Check the company you keep, be careful with the spells you learn, stay away from the books in this house, and I won't worry about locking you up in Azkaban one day." "Really, sir, I appreciate your concern," Harry smiled thinly, "but I don't plan on landing myself in Azkaban." "That's the thing," Moody answered. "They never do." Hogwarts seemed unusually noisy and cheerful after a stay at Grimmauld Place. Back there, the volume of conversation rarely rose above that generally accepted in a mausoleum. Hogwarts, on the other hand, was a gathering of wild hordes in one enclosed space. Harry was really glad to be there again. "What's got you so happy?" Blaise asked from his spot on the couch opposite to Harry's in the hidden room. "Judging by the glazed and slightly stupid look on your face during dinner, things between you and Miss Bones are going well?" "Oh, piss off," Harry recommended, grinning. Things were going well, and Harry hoped they would stay this way because, frankly, enough things in his life weren't so simple right now. While being back at Hogwarts was great, Harry was also feeling the weight of all his responsibilities after a stressful first semester and a Christmas holiday that did not really count for one. The dueling club required his close attention. There was research Harry had to do, both on Voldemort and on spells to learn. Hagrid was being threatened by Umbridge. The twins were being a menace to society. The pro-Voldemort faction in Slytherin was pressuring Harry to pick a side like never before, and he was running out of things to say to them. Mindful of the way he supported the Order's plan, Harry was waiting for the repercussions of his acquiescence to hit them all. Strangely, the teachers also expected Harry to go to class and submit homework, as if this was a school or something. "Zabina's just jealous," Minnick proclaimed, returning Harry's attention to the present. "Katie Bell got together with Ed Carmichael, you see, from Ravenclaw." "It's a passing folly," Blaise said dismissively. "She'll come to her senses." I hear pigs are learning to fly too, Milly remarked. Well, at least I have love interests. What are you interested in except for your cat and your murder mysteries? Milly's love for murder mysteries was the only manifestation of cultural exchange between her and any of Harry's other friends. Padma had introduced her to the novels while she and Harry had been dating, and Milly had even thawed to Padma for a while in the aftermath. Milly opened her mouth to deliver what would undoubtedly be a crushing blow to Blaise, but then Padma spoke up. "Oh, seriously, Katie Zabini sounds awful. She'll never marry you." Blaise bristled. "I'll have you know that Zabini is a noble and ancient name, which suits very few girls. Face it, you'll be stuck marrying Astoria Greengrass because only her name sounds half decent when combined with yours." "Yeah, because Padma Finch-Fletchley isn't stupid at all." Finch-Fletchley, the new boyfriend. Harry wasn't sure he entirely approved of that. "Stupid or not, we're together. And what did Katie Bell say when she turned you down?" Millicent smirked. Blaise scowled. A little off to the side, Luna and Hermione were arguing, or rather, Hermione was trying to argue with Luna. Luna, for her part, was humming a merry tune and making Neville a necklace of billywick propellers. Harry did a swish and flick with his wand. The cushion he'd been aiming at rose in the air. Harry spun it mid-float, concentrating to maintain control. He let it fall and caught it part way, then did a little twirl and guided it down with excruciating slowness. According to the advanced group, he was getting good at non-verbal spells. It seemed that his relentless training in dueling over the last year was paying off. He really did pick up new forms of offensive and defensive magic more easily these days. In an ideal world, this would spill over to subjects like transfiguration and arithmancy, but Harry had no such luck. His skills at charms, though, were getting better. Looking up, Harry saw Cedric watching him closely. "Is this really necessary?" Cedric asked. Seeing Harry's raised eyebrow, he added, "You pushing yourself so much, I mean. Not that being diligent is a bad thing, but how long can you do that for? You're already practicing with us for the defense, Newt." Harry felt his expression harden. "I don't need to pass the Newt. I need to defeat Voldemort." Cedric looked stricken. "Eventually, maybe. But you can't expect to fight him now. You're in your 5th year. You're too young to devote your life to training, like you'll never get another chance. Cedric, the first time Voldemort tried to kill me, I was 1 year old. He was also pretty serious when he threw the killing curse at me last year. How important do you think my age is?" Harry gave an aggressive jab with his wand, and the cushion catapulted to the side, narrowly missing Hermione's head. The girl turned around to glare at Harry for a moment. "I don't think many other students, even those in the dueling club, take everything as seriously as you do," Cedric said, as the cushion flew back into Harry's hand. "Well, I would have to, wouldn't I?" Harry muttered. Of course Cedric didn't know about the prophecy, so he couldn't understand how urgent it was for Harry to get strong enough. Harry would tell him and his other friends eventually, when the time felt right. Cedric gave Harry a sharp glance, but refrained from saying anything. Not one to pry, Cedric. Harry liked people with tact. For a while they listened in silence, as a verbal sparring between Blaise, Milly, and Padma continued. Then Cedric sighed. "There was actually something I wanted to talk to you about." Why did Harry have a feeling it wasn't going to be good? "The Weasleys," Cedric clarified, confirming Harry's premonition. "I hate Umbridge as much as the next person, but there are things that, as head boy, I just can't condone. Premeditated murder is one of them." "It wasn't really a murder attempt," Harry said. "I'm sure the twins didn't realize that imbuing tung-tung toffee with a babbling beverage might be a little dangerous and could result in her near death," Cedric suggested. "Give me some credit here. Umbridge escaped through sheer dumb luck." "It may have been Peeves," Harry said, "and I may be an Arabian sheikh, but I don't think so." It was Harry's turn to sigh. At least the twins hadn't been convicted of the crime. However, Harry wasn't sure that they'd managed to evade prosecution for long, especially since they didn't show any willingness to stop their anti-Umbridge crusade. Last semester it was all fun and games. Limerick laxative in Umbridge's tea, her hair dyed pink, her office filled with dung. This semester Umbridge got personal with her insinuations about Arthur Weasley's death, and the Weasleys weren't known for their excessive patience. How Ron and Ginny were holding up Harry wasn't sure, but the twins had upped the ante in their guerrilla war against Umbridge. Harry didn't have anything against it, really. Umbridge was rapidly tipping the scales in favour of chucking her out of Hogwarts after all, especially now that she was threatening Hagrid and provoking the twins. If the twins let off some steam and drove Umbridge away in one sweep, Harry wasn't one for complaining. Clearly, though, something as blatant as a murder attempt was going to alarm even the most tolerant of observers. "I've let it all go on for longer than I should have already," Cedric said. "I've turned the other way last semester, and I've done nothing now, even though I know who's behind things. But they're going too far, and their father... Harry, I understand and sympathize, but I have responsibilities towards this school, and I can't in good conscience ignore them any longer." "Yeah, I know," Harry said tiredly. "But what do you want me to do exactly?" "Talk to the twins," Cedric said. "Try to make them see sense." Harry snorted. "Like they would listen to me." "You used to have a measure of control over them in the past," Cedric said. "I think you might still." The idea was so ludicrous, Harry didn't know where to begin refuting it. "I'm just saying, Harry," Cedric shook his head. "If you don't do anything about the twins, I will have to, in my official capacity. And I'd really, really rather not." "Yeah," Harry said. "Thanks for the warning. I'll figure something out." Because he'd have to, and wasn't that how things always worked? "Look, I do know how you feel," Harry said, manoeuvring between pieces of a shattered chandelier that littered the hallway. "But there's a line here somewhere, and I have a feeling you might soon cross it." "The line between what and what?" George inquired, sidestepping a pile of broken crystal. "Between pranking and homicide," Harry said bluntly. And that chandelier nearly falling on Umbridge's head? That had been very close to homicide. "Umbridge could go hang," Harry continued, anticipating the twins' question. "It's your unconquerable souls I'm worried about, because these kinds of jokes tend to be rewarded by a vacation with Dementors for company, which is not what we're aiming for here." "Pretty words," Fred sneered, "but you basically want us to quit, leave Umbridge alone, and behave like good little boys. That's going to work real well, Harry." "I want you to stop putting yourselves in danger. You're not stupid enough to think that you'll keep getting away with everything, are you? It's not like people don't know who's behind the pranks." "They've got no evidence," George said. "No evidence?" Harry repeated. "You've used products on Umbridge that are recognisably yours. Who else in the school invents shit on the scale that you do?" "Our products are for sale," Fred said coldly. "Anyone could buy them and use them on Umbridge. Once again, there's no proof." "But everyone knows," Harry persisted. Apart from Cedric, he'd already received hints from Snape and Dumbledore that they expected something to be done about the twins. It was an open secret that they were behind the mayhem, and there came a point when hard evidence wasn't needed to convict someone. Past history spoke against them. Like in Harry's second year with Hagrid. There'd been no direct clues, but Hagrid had been sent to Azkaban based on his behaviour decades before. The twins were notorious pranksters. It did not recommend them now. "Quit with the dark predictions," Fred shrugged airily. "Nothing's happened yet." Harry gave him a hard look. "Don't make me regret sticking up for you all this time." "Really been putting your neck on the line, have you?" George snapped. "If you like, I can tell Cedric that you're not listening to me, and he's free to take disciplinary action against you," Harry offered. "I can also inform the teachers that they can stop waiting for me to be a good influence on you. I mean, I'm trying to help, but I don't have to take shit from you and for you, you know." Harry contemplated letting the twins just crash and burn by themselves without worrying about their situation. He imagined giving up the responsibility over the dueling club to someone else, and forgetting to worry about Umbridge, and whatever, screw dealing with Voldemort. He was just a 15-year-old kid, and what did he know, right? Right. That had been a liberating 2 seconds. The twins were looking a little uncomfortable. Harry hoped his message had sunk in, but their first words were not what he'd expected. "Are you okay?" Harry stared at them. Yeah? "Are you asking us or telling us?" Fred inquired, with something that almost looked like a smile. Harry shrugged. For a few paces they walked towards the great hall in silence. Then Fred gave a sigh. "How the fuck do you do it? I mean, Umbridge has been at you the whole year. Do you just not care, or—" Harry rolled his eyes. "Hello," he said pleasantly. "My name is Harry Potter. You may have heard of me. According to the Daily Prophet, I was arrested for illegal possession of a flying carpet 2 days ago. The Quibbler, on the other hand, brings good news. It seems that my old Chinese opera troupe is accepting me back with open arms, which weakly suggests that I have recently taken up with a harem of Brazilian beauties. I quite like that development in my life." The twins shared a look of, was it amusement? "Yeah, okay, we get it," George said. "No need to recount your other illustrious achievements." "I'm not sure Susan will approve of those Brazilian wenches, though," Fred added. "I'd keep them hushed up if I were you." "Yeah," said Harry. "Sure thing." And for a moment it almost seemed like that things were normal between them. They parted at the great hall doors. The twins went off to the Gryffindor table, and Harry joined his breakfasting housemates, hoping that the twins would bear in mind at least something he'd said to them. Blaise hardly even raised his head from food at Harry's approach. Nothing up to and including the end of the world got between Blaise and his breakfast, but Millie gave Harry an amicable nod. "Any progress?" she inquired, gesturing vaguely towards the Gryffindor table. "We'll see." Harry was reaching for pumpkin juice when owls flew into the great hall, filling the air with the sound of flapping wings and hoots of greeting. "Here we go," Millie said, catching the Daily Prophet from a postal bird. Hedwig arrived a few seconds later, carrying a note from Hagrid in addition to the newspaper. Harry shared some bacon with Hedwig, stroked her pretty wings, and penned a quick reply to Hagrid, promising to visit him soon. In his copious free time, as it were. By the time Harry reached for the paper, Millie was already deeply engrossed in the front-page article and scowling at it with alarming ferocity. "Mass breakout from Azkaban," proclaimed the headline. "Ministry fears Black is rallying point for old Death Eaters." Black was having a lot less fun than the Ministry thought. Harry quickly scanned the article, absorbing the most relevant bits. It seemed that the other shoe he'd been waiting for had finally fallen. He'd been on edge for the last couple of weeks, expecting Voldemort to give a reaction to the Order's schemes. Harry had no doubt that Voldemort would have heard about Harry's request to listen to the prophecy within days of it being lodged, and Voldemort's silence had grated on his nerves. Still, Harry was unsure whether the timing of the Azkaban breakout wasn't coincidental. The breakout would require effort, and it must have been planned in advance. Besides which, Voldemort had said, even back at the graveyard last June, that he'd release his followers from Azkaban. Of course, he might have moved up his plans after hearing about Harry's request. 10 of the most dangerous Death Eaters joining Voldemort's ranks. Shit. Harry felt the weight of people's looks on him and glanced up to see Montague, Nott, and a few others observing him carefully, waiting for him to show a reaction. After all, if he was considering joining Voldemort, he was supposed to take this as good news. Harry checked his expression and hoped that his blank mask hadn't slipped while he'd been reading the article. He smiled at Montague in greeting. Montague frowned. Harry cocked an eyebrow. Montague shook his head. The silent conversation could probably have gone on for a while, reaching dizzying intellectual heights, but then Harry saw commotion at the Gryffindor table out of the corner of his eye. He turned just in time to watch Neville storm out of the great hall, Hermione hot on his heels. "What?" "This," Millie said, and pointed to the picture of Bellatrix Lestrange in the newspaper. Harry had not paid attention to the caption until now. Apparently, he really should have. "Bellatrix Lestrange," it said next to the portrait of a scowling, dark-haired witch. "Convicted of the torture and permanent incapacitation of Frank and Alice Longbottom." "Torture and permanent incapacitation," Harry repeated, despite himself. He had known that Neville's parents were long-term residents of St. Mungo's, and that Neville got solemn whenever Death Eaters came up, so did that add up to torture until permanent incapacitation? "What?" Blaise asked, startled enough to abandon his breakfast for a moment. "Did I hear something about torture?" "Here," Harry said, thrusting the newspaper at Blaise. "See for yourself." Harry hadn't dealt well with the presumed murderer of his parents. When the presumed murderer of his parents had escaped from Azkaban, Neville was a good person, and surely he wouldn't sink to the depths of hatred that Harry had felt. Still. "I should go after him," Harry said, pushing his plate away. "Not so fast," Millie said, grabbing his arm. "I think you might want to direct your helpful urges elsewhere. Have a look at your dear girlfriend." Harry glanced at Susan and saw that she seemed to be wilting under the curious and pitying gazes of her Hufflepuff classmates. "Leonard Travers," Blaise informed Harry, pointing at his newspaper, "killed Bones's uncle and his family, it turns out. Oh dear, Harry, whomever of your miserable companions are you going to comfort, the damsel or the Gryffindor?" "I choose the damsel," Millicent said clinically, and lowered her voice. "Longbottom's got Granger to get on his nerves right now, and going for Bones looks like it's more about romance than about politics." "I'm glad I have your blessing," Harry murmured, and got up from the table. Neville had removed himself from the vicinity, and he did have Hermione right now. Susan, on the other hand, was still here and was clearly uncomfortable. Harry knew how public scrutiny could aggravate a personal crisis, and if there was anything he could do to help. "Harry?" For the first time since their relationship had started, Susan greeted him with a less than brilliant smile. She was probably not sure that he could say anything worthwhile, which was fair enough. Harry wasn't either. "Yeah, I just thought, how about we take a walk?" he suggested, ignoring the suspicious looks of Ernie Macmillan and Hannah Abbott, who seemed ready to pounce on him if he upset Susan any further. "There's still time until class." "Yes, let's," Susan said, sounding relieved. Harry would have preferred to take her outside. He always seemed to find some calm in walking around Hogwarts grounds or watching the lake, but it was really cold, and they didn't have their outdoor clothes. Instead, they ended up walking slowly to Susan's next class. Harry didn't know whether he should take Susan's hand or hug her or try to ask her about her uncle. Their relationship hadn't yet progressed to the point of poignant discussions, and this would be a damn unfortunate first one to have. "I didn't know who killed Uncle Edgar and Aunt Lucy and my cousins," Susan said suddenly, breaking the silence. "And now that I do, I'm not sure what I should feel. I've never really hated anyone, but it seems that now, maybe I should start." Harry wondered whether Neville had known about Bellatrix Lestrange before today, whether he was teaching himself to hate her now. Right this moment, Harry also felt that he had to say something deep and comforting to Susan, but he was woefully unqualified for such a task. "You don't have to hate Travers to hate what he's done," he offered in the end. Susan nodded pensively and didn't say anything else until they reached the Transfiguration classroom. Then she turned to him. "Thank you for not asking whether I'm all right," she said, looking Harry in the eye. Harry grimaced. It was a pointless question, of course. She wouldn't be all right. However, "Are you?" He raised an eyebrow, and Susan gave him a small smile. "I am, actually," she said, and slid her hand into his. "I just need some time to think, but I'll be fine. It's mostly the sympathy from others that—" She broke off, biting her lip, and Harry squeezed her hand. "I know, but don't let it bother you, okay?" She smiled. "Okay." The footsteps of approaching students broke the intimacy of their conversation, and waking up to the lateness of the hour, Susan urged Harry to rush to his class. Harry had to run all the way to History of Magic, and Blaise smirked at him in a really annoying way when Harry finally got there. but he felt it was definitely worth it. Neville, of course, was a problem on a whole new level. Harry watched frowning as Neville cast spell after spell with teeth-grit determination. Hermione was Neville's partner in the dueling club today, but she seemed to be thinking better of the idea 15 minutes into the session. Hermione was much more skilled, but Neville's single-mindedness was unnerving. Harry was still not sure that the talk he'd had with Neville would be beneficial in the long run. Once Harry had found Neville, using the Marauder's map to find Neville's hideout by the lake, Neville had told Harry that Bellatrix Lestrange and her husband had tortured his parents into insanity with the Cruciatus curse. Neville had sounded almost detached as he'd related this, while clearly becoming quite consumed by the thought of taking revenge on the Lestranges. Harry had never noticed a malicious streak in Neville before, and didn't think it suited him. "I will meet Bellatrix one day, and then she'll be the one crying for mercy. I hate her." Neville's attitude reminded Harry so much of himself back in third year, when he'd been hell-bent on confronting Sirius Black, that he'd had to bite his tongue in order to refrain from uttering words of caution. Having been there, Harry knew that Neville didn't need to hear empty platitudes. He needed an outlet for his anger, which Harry could provide for him in the dueling club. And then, listening to Neville, Harry had made a decision. He'd waited carefully as he'd stood next to Neville at the lake's frozen shore. Finally, he'd figured that there would never be a better time or a better reason. So he told Neville about the prophecy. He felt that, if he hadn't told, it would almost constitute lying. The prophecy had played a huge part in Neville's life and determined his childhood no less than it had Harry's, and if anyone deserved to know, it was Neville. He had the right to know why his parents had been sought out that night, why the Longbottoms had been the Death Eater's immediate target, what information Alice and Frank Longbottom had been tortured for. At first Harry had thought that Neville hadn't heard him, or hadn't understood, so still and silent he'd remained. Then Neville had let out a shuddering breath. "It could have been either one of us, but instead it's going to be both. You might be the one to kill Voldemort, but I'll be there every step of the way. And I'll kill the Lestranges." And the thing was, Harry ought to have been happy that Neville was suddenly taking the war seriously. However, it didn't seem right to him that Neville should be so motivated by hatred. Harry could admit to being worried, and he wasn't sure whether it was hypocritical of him to feel this way. He wanted Neville to be serious about the war, but he wanted him to be serious for the right reasons, even though he wasn't sure his own reasons were any better, or that he had any business wanting to shield Neville from the ugliest sides of the war. Neville and Susan and the twins, and if Harry tried to protect all his friends, he'd have no one fighting beside him, and it made for an unfortunate vicious circle he'd recently started wondering about. Closer to the present, one of Neville's overpowered spells went sideways and hit Lisa Turpin. Instead of falling into a faint, Lisa grew giant mushrooms on her head. She screamed. Hermione rushed to help. Someone laughed. Harry rubbed his forehead and asked himself whether he wanted to deal with it right now. "I'll take care of the mushrooms," Cedric murmured, walking past Harry. "I think you should diffuse the situation with green grass, though." "Good idea," Harry agreed, and looked around the hidden room in search of that particular situation. All the students were practicing the blasting curse, while the younger ones were busy with the impediment jinx. Some seemed to be doing more laughing and fooling about than working, evidently regarding the dueling club as the time to freely socialize with the other houses, and others were appropriately diligent. Finally, Harry spotted clear signs of an argument taking place, and walked over to where the diminutive Astoria Greengrass was facing off her Hufflepuff yearmate. "Completely unfair! Shouldn't have tried to trip me up. What seems to be the problem?" Harry cut in smoothly. "She used some evil curse on me," the Hufflepuff said at once. "Look!" Trying to recall the boy's name, Derek or something, Harry glanced at the hand the boy thrust at him. The fingers had gone all limp. It looked as if all bone and muscle had been removed. but Harry was reasonably sure Astoria could not yet cast such a spell. No, it looked more like an ordinary Jellyfinger's curse, which was, to be fair, not that ordinary, and not something Astoria should have cast unless she wanted trouble. It was knowing spells like these that made Slytherins come off as mean little bullies half the time. Harry turned to Astoria, and she coloured slightly under his reproachful gaze. "He tried to trip me up. I'd have fallen really hard if Prissy and Wendy hadn't caught me," the blonde girl protested, gesturing to her friends. "He doesn't like Slytherins. I heard so." Harry muttered under his breath, reversing the jinx. "Let's avoid incidents like this in the future, shall we?" he asked, and raised an eyebrow at Astoria. "Yes," she said, visibly biting down on the "sir." Harry had thought he'd stomped out the younger year's urge to address him formally. He was neither that venerated, nor, surely, that scary. According to Blaise, it didn't help that Astoria and her Slytherin year-mates did not remember Harry as a quiet little thirsty. Their initial impression of him had included the near strangulation of Malfoy with the Parseltongue couch, and that clearly made for lasting impact. Derek something smiled at the downcast-looking Astoria. Harry gave him a pleasant smile. The boy stopped smirking and looked vaguely alarmed. If you have a problem with Slytherins, Harry said, still maintaining the friendly facade, I'd rather you took it up with me, so that we avoid unnecessary miscommunication. Was there anything you wanted to say? For a moment it looked as if Derek's sense of self-preservation would triumph over pride, and he'd leave the scene. However, the cluster of people around him and the story had thickened instead of dispersing, and backing out of the fight would mean losing face. "Yeah, you say you're against you-know-who, but there's rumours going around, and how do we really know we can trust you or any other Slytherins?" Derek said, trying to appear brave. There was a sudden hush. Though Harry was glad to see it only extended to the immediate vicinity, most of the duelling club remained unaware. "I don't see how your trust or lack thereof would relate to our house," Harry said nonchalantly. "Should I maybe start mistrusting Hufflepuffs on sheer principle?" "Hufflepuffs aren't the ones who are all friendly with the junior Death Eaters," said Morag McDougal, a Ravenclaw in Harry's ear. "I've heard some rumours too, if you'd like to know. And if you're really so against you-know-who, as you say, shouldn't you have more problems with people in your house?" "Not everyone in Slytherin is planning to become a Death Eater," Harry said, keeping a tight rein on his temper. "And I'd have thought that a clever Ravenclaw, at least, would be above oversimplified generalizations." He cocked his head to the side. "Now, if you're quite done disrupting the session—" His glare was enough to silence the other protests. For now. Watching the people disperse, Harry was left with the feeling that he'd only delayed the inevitable face-down. "That was close, wasn't it?" Terry asked from near Harry. Harry turned around to see him and Anthony standing behind him. "Close in what sense?" Just in case, Harry put up a soundboard. "We're not dumb, Harry," Terry said. "I've heard rumours, too. I've been kind of waiting for you to say something about it, but—" "What rumours? Is it true that you-know-who is trying to recruit you? Is that what they're saying?" The question was purely rhetorical, of course. Harry had known that this would eventually happen. The whispers of his recruitment would spread, but never would have been too soon. "Yes." Anthony turned to face Harry. "So is it true?" "Kind of," Harry hedged. Then, glancing at his friend's expressions, "Well, yes." "Well," Terry looked away. "Fuck." Harry shrugged. It could have been worse. Voldemort could have ordered all the Slytherins to kill Harry, and Harry was not at all sure he'd have lived to see today if that had happened. Still, he figured Terry and Anthony wouldn't see it like that. Most people wouldn't see it like that. "Do some people actually believe I might join Voldemort?" "How would we know?" Anthony said, uncharacteristically snappish. "It's all rumour and gossip, but why didn't you say anything? How long has this been going on?" Harry shrugged. "Long enough, but I've been dealing with it fine." "Using it, you mean?" Terry said. "Morag was right. You're using this as a leverage in Slytherin, aren't you? Harry frowned. Just so we get this straight, why the accusing tone? Don't you see that it's... Terry grimaced and exchanged glances with Anthony. Pretending to be one of them, selling out your principles just to keep people off your back. See, this is why I haven't told you, Harry said, interrupting him. I'm sorry if it offends your sensibilities, but not everything can be solved by charging into an honourable battle. Terry frowned. Anthony peered at Harry closely. You're not sorry at all, are you? No. Thought so. Harry clenched his fists. Would you maybe like to get off that high horse for 5 seconds? You don't know enough to judge. Of course we don't know, Terry cried, suddenly agitated. Because you're not telling us anything. You're not telling any of us anything, Harry. And how are we supposed to understand what you're doing if we don't even know what you're thinking half the time? Harry thought back to the Order and their mistrust, to Padma's admonishments and Blazer's warnings. Had he really been too closed off lately? Lately, ever since the ordeal last June. Since the second killing curse hit him, since he gave up on joining his dead parents, since that cold feeling of purpose settled into his chest. But how was he supposed to talk about his feelings with anyone when he spent most of his time trying to avoid feeling altogether? Yeah, Harry said, blowing out a long breath. I don't know. I'm sorry. It's not that I don't trust you, I just... We get it. A lot of things have been happening, and you've been busy, Terry said, and ran a hand through his hair. Hell, you're pretty much single-handedly running this club, and don't think we don't appreciate it. Just sometimes it seems we see you, but at the same time we really don't. It's not that I don't care, really. We know you care, Anthony said firmly. We can see that you're putting a lot of effort into this club, into making sure Neville is all right, and the twins, and you're doing all these things, but it doesn't have to be a one-way thing, with you doing everything. Let us in a bit, and maybe we'll be able to help. Harry nodded and tried to ignore the guilty feeling that arose. There was still no way he was telling them about his forays into dark magic, and about how tempting Voldemort's offer had sounded for a whole of 2 seconds, and... Terry and Anthony had condemned even using Voldemort's offer to gain power in Slytherin. Would they, or many of his other friends, keep trusting Harry if they knew the rest? Harry wasn't at all sure, but somehow he was in no hurry to find out. Sitting on a chintz armchair in Dumbledore's office, Harry reflected that he was seeing more of Dumbledore this year than in all the previous years combined. This time Harry was here because his request from early January had finally been answered a month later. The Ministry had set a date for when Harry would be welcome to come and listen to the prophecy, accompanied by Dumbledore as the adult of his choice. In other words, the date was set for a confrontation between the Order and the Death Eaters, should Voldemort take the bait and show up at the Ministry. Some of the document's details hinted that Voldemort would. First of all, there was the problem of timing. As you see, Dumbledore said, pointing to the invitation that lay on the desk between them, you will be allowed to listen to the prophecy on the 15th of March at 8 o'clock in the evening, which basically meant that Harry would be scheduled to arrive after the Ministry's working hours. The Department of Mysteries is known for functioning outside General Ministry regulations, Dumbledore informed him. As the reason for that late hour, they cite considerations of your safety. Harry was hard-pressed to believe the official document, and Dumbledore clearly shared his scepticism. It was much more likely that Voldemort, who'd heard of the request, had managed to arrange matters so that the Ministry would be nearly empty at the time of the potential confrontation. After all, the fewer witnesses, the better, and what did Voldemort care that the whole point of this exercise was to out him to the general public? Of course, it wasn't Harry who'd be going, it was Tonks. However, that brought them to the second problem. It says here that Ministry officials will be coming to pick me up, Harry told Dumbledore. Dumbledore already knew this, of course, but Harry felt like bringing up this rather important point. What Ministry officials? You didn't mention anything about this in the standard procedure, sir. and this is really going to complicate everything." "Standard procedure does not seem to apply where you are involved, my dear boy," Dumbledore said. "It is indeed not common at all for a ministry visitor to be accompanied to the ministry from their home. However, as I'm sure you can imagine, they cite considerations of my safety, yes, which I suppose means making sure that it's really me and not an imposter they're picking up." "I'm afraid so," Dumbledore said. "Voldemort must have considered the possibility of deception, and he is eager to make sure that the real Harry Potter arrives to the ministry on the allotted night." According to the original plan, Harry would go to Grimmauld Place before leaving for the ministry. Then he'd stay there, and Tonks would continue on in his stead. If Harry were to be picked up, however, the switch could not occur painlessly at Grimmauld, for the ministry could not be granted the order's address. In fact, "Tonks and I are going to have to switch at Hogwarts, aren't we?" Harry said, resigned. "And it has to be after classes, because otherwise someone is certain to catch on that it's not me." There would be time between his last class of the day and dinner to conduct the switch, although it would still be dangerous. Harry was sure that the pro-Voldemort faction would be warned in advance to watch his every step that day, and slipping under their radar would be very tricky, especially if Harry were to do it in a way that would not arouse suspicion. What sort of time frame were they looking at again? Harry glanced at the official invitation to listen to the prophecy. 15th of March, 8 o'clock, ministry officials would be getting to Harry's location in advance to pick him up. Harry swore inwardly. In advance could mean anything, but considering that Harry's appointment was at 8, it likely meant after dinner. Could Tonks weather a dinner at the Slytherin table while pretending to be Harry to a bunch of people who would be watching like hawks for any abnormality? He had the sneaking feeling that she might not. "Sir," Harry spoke up, and raised his eyes to Dumbledore. "We might have a problem." "We often do," Dumbledore said serenely. "The trick, if I may say so, is knowing how to solve them." This particular problem, Dumbledore suggested, solving by conducting the switch before dinner, but letting Harry's friends in on the secret, so that they would provide Tonks with enough cover. "Perhaps we would benefit from a distraction," Dumbledore said, making an emphasis on the word distraction that made Harry listen closely. "With the limited time we are granted, it could be beneficial for us if the student body had something else to focus their attention on, and I believe that distractions are not a rare occurrence in our school as of late." Harry had no doubt whatsoever that Dumbledore was talking about the twins. Directing the twins' destructive urges to a good cause did not seem like a bad idea. In fact, maybe Harry could negotiate a temporary ceasefire in return for a sanctioned strike later. Marching off to see the twins, Harry had a feeling that they might indeed be quite interested in orchestrating Operation Distraction. It could be that the date had been set by the ministry, and so Voldemort had given new orders. It could be that this had always been the amount of time Harry would be given to prevaricate. Or it could just be that they had got tired and bored. Whatever the reason, the pro-Voldemort faction at Hogwarts had run out of patience to wait for Harry while he was making up his mind. "This, Potter, is a portkey, charmed especially for you," Edward Montague said, cornering Harry in his dormitory. Harry didn't think it was an accident that Malfoy and Nott were lurking by the door, or that Crabbe and Goyle were waiting for them outside. Harry took the proffered quill, knowing that it couldn't activate immediately. The portkey wards over Hogwarts wouldn't let it. "A portkey to where?" he inquired, twisting the quill in his hands. It looked innocuous enough, but what promise did it hold? "To a place where you can prove your worth," Montague said, smiling unpleasantly. "Or not, if you fail to take it. But that'll be answer enough, won't it?" "A test of loyalty, then." "Depends where it takes me," Harry said. "I'm not exactly known for risking my life, doesn't matter what for, and I can't guarantee—" "Don't even try, Potter," Montague said, and he was suddenly looming over Harry. "Don't you try to give me more bullshit about how you're not sure about, and how it all depends, and how you have to think. Let me explain this to you. You can take this portkey, and prove that you're with us, or else you can chicken out of taking this portkey and prove that you're against us." "But—" "I don't care why," Montague persisted. "I don't care what your reasoning might be. You don't take the portkey, we know what you're made of. No ifs, no buts, no extenuating circumstances. Black, white, yes, no. Foreign concept to you, I know, but you should be smart enough to grasp it." Malfoy was smirking. Harry's fists were itching to hit him. "When am I supposed to take the portkey?" Harry asked. "Use your brain, Potter. When could you possibly take it?" Harry's temper flared. "I don't know, Ed. You want to sound a little more welcoming here, because it's you who wants me to go." For a moment Montague looked about to lash out, and then, to Malfoy's visible disappointment, he reined the impulse in. "Valentine's Day," he said. "It's a Hogsmeade weekend. We'll be outside of the castle's wards, and nobody will miss you." "Except my girlfriend," Harry said mildly. "I'm sure she can find someone better to satisfy her," Malfoy said. "And I'm sure you'll look loads better with your nose bashed into your skull. You want to try?" "Cut it out, both of you," Montague snapped. "Potter, are your instructions clear?" Harry contemplated saying no, just to fuck with Montague for a bit, because he didn't like being addressed the way he was right now. However, he also liked his face the way it was, thank you very much, and 5-to-1 odds, 3-to-1 even if you discounted Grab and Goyle, were not exactly favourable. "Crystal clear," he said instead. "Your oratory skills do you credit." Montague squinted at him suspiciously, looking for mockery, but Harry kept his face perfectly straight, and Montague decided to let it go. Once he left the room, Nott followed. "You'll get what's coming to you, Potter," Malfoy said, elated. "You'll be dead meat soon." "Fuck you and the snake you rode in on," Harry told him. "Excuse me while I go compose my epitaph." Really, though, Malfoy had hit rather close to the truth. There was no way in Seven Hells that Harry was taking that portkey on Valentine's Day, because it would likely take him to Voldemort, and Harry would voluntarily meet with Voldemort only when he knew he could kill the bastard. Seeing as Harry was not taking the portkey on the 14th of February, Voldemort and all his supporters would know for a fact that Harry would not be joining them. Then Harry would be fair game. He had about a week of peaceful life remaining. That was nice to know. Harry considered it. Even if Voldemort did fall into the Order's trap and was revealed to exist on the 15th of March, it still left a month for Harry to dodge danger on his own, without the Ministry worrying about his health. Perhaps warning his friends would be a good idea. And Susan too, of course. Pity that Voldemort wouldn't buy a date with a girlfriend as valid excuse for not showing up. "I can't believe you're not more scared," Padma said, looking anxious. She even refrained from shooting displeased glances towards Susan, who was included in the hidden room meeting for once. "It does not do to lose nerve at a critical juncture," Blaise said brightly. "Hold on, Harry, we'll have your beautiful burial yet." "I've always known it was coming," Harry said, putting a hand on Susan's arm. He'd never seen her glare at anyone, but the look she was shooting at Blaise could rival Hermione's darkest glower. "You've always known that you will die tragically young and have a lovely burial?" Luna asked, raising her pale eyebrows. "I've always known they won't wait indefinitely," Harry clarified. "I've been preparing. It's not quite as bad as it appears." "Yes, it is," Hermione said. "You're not safe in Slytherin. Half of them will try to kill you in your sleep." "They will fail," Harry said. "I've had 5 years to ward my bed." "What safety measures are you going to take?" Terry asked. "Because this is not a joke. They might actually try to kill you." "I haven't exactly been wasting time," Harry said. "Voldemort's supporters are many, but there's a lot of dueling club members too. We've had some disagreements recently, with people questioning Harry's loyalty. Funny how they tended to do that. But I should think that people will be reassured once they see junior Death Eaters declaring war on me." "And then?" Padma prodded. "If it comes to open confrontations, I'll have a significant proportion of the school on my side," Harry said. "If they try to make my life difficult and sabotage me in class, once again, I have enough people to help. If they try to kill me in secret, with surreptitious attempts on my life, Harry sighed. "That's going to suck." "We'll watch out for poison," Millicent said. "That's one of the most obvious ones." Neville, who'd been sitting there, pale and quiet, finally spoke up. "Just whatever you do, please be careful, and tell us how we can help. I want to help in any way I can." Harry nodded at him gratefully. Perhaps this latest turn of events would distract Neville from his vendetta against the Lestranges, on which he still seemed disturbingly intent. "Thanks. I'm sure I'll need your help," Harry said. "We're in for an interesting month." The first altercation happened right after dinner on Valentine's Day. The junior Death Eater contingent had been eerily calm during the meal, evidently reserving their ire for when they'd have the freedom to express it. The retreat to the common rooms gave those of them in Slytherin just such an opportunity. "You've picked your side, then," Edward Montague said, and Harry experienced a strong sense of déjà vu. Because this, or something like this, had happened before. He'd already been here, in this very spot, and had the angry faces of the crowd directed at him, and prepared himself to weather their wrath. Except now it was different. He knew who his friends and enemies were, and the circle around him was not nearly as tight as it had been last June, and the feeling of all against one was decidedly lacking, because Harry had considerable numbers to support him these days, even if very few of his allies came from among upperclassmen. "For the life of me, I can't figure out why you choose to stick together with mudbloods and Dumbledore," Montague continued, mouth-twisting. "But it's your funeral." Oddly, Harry caught a hint of genuine hurt in Montague's tone. It was as if he really wanted to know why Harry had chosen the way he had, as if he viewed Harry's choice as a desertion rather than a given. "The Dark Lord wants to kill me," Harry said. "He's already tried to kill me twice, and I believe there will be a third time. The truce he's offering is temporary at best, and he will not hesitate to attack me again when he decides to. You understand that I can't take his side, considering." "How long have you thought that?" Miles Bletchley inquired. "Have you said any truth to us in the last few months?" "Potter was never going to join," Malfoy declared, looking smug. "You didn't believe me before, but now you see I was right." "Are you claiming to be smarter than the Dark Lord, Malfoy?" Nott asked sharply. "Aw." Harry was going to miss the Junior Death Eater power games. And it was going to be weird not to be included on that any more. To still know the inside jokes, but not be allowed in on the banter. To become once again the pariah on his Quidditch team, and generally among the circle of people he got along with reasonably well. He wondered whether it would be strange for them too. "You've made a mistake," Montague told him. "You've chosen wrong. You won't last among Dumbledore's lackeys." "But it's too late now," Bletchley said. The Dark Lord won't forgive." He gave Harry a cold smile. "And we won't, either." "Our Lord will show you no mercy when you meet him again," Montague concluded, and Harry would have taken that for a pro forma threat, if not for the sudden exchange of glances and grins smothered at Montague's declaration. Harry grew instantly wary. Montague seemed to be referring to something already planned, and it could very well be the trip Harry was allegedly taking to the Ministry. Could certain persons at Hogwarts be aware of it already? Harry was suddenly more anxious than ever to make sure that he would not end up going. Of course, he would have other problems to occupy his time in the meanwhile. At first, Harry had wondered how the hostile members of his house would express their feelings, considering the rule of Slytherin public unity. Turned out, plausible deniability was key. Surviving on a Bailey Daces turned into an exciting challenge, with lovely things like Quidditch practices among people intent on causing Harry harm, and his potions were being sabotaged regularly, as if dealing with a moody Neville and an even moodier Snape in that class hadn't been enough. And there was a drastic increase in attempts to make Harry slip up and incur Umbridge's overt displeasure. "We must stand united in this trying hour," Ernie Macmillan told him at one dueling club session, puffing out his chest. "You can count on us, Harry." Harry counted. not all club participants were convinced that Harry was an innocent victim in the recent surge of attacks, but most helped by providing the manpower for a human buffer between Harry and his assailants. At all times when Harry was out in public, there was usually a witness nearby that wasn't openly connected to Harry, and would therefore be trusted by the teachers to be impartial. After several instances of being punished for the attacks on Harry due to those witness accounts, Harry's ill-wishers learned to tread carefully. Harry was gladder than ever that he'd made nearly everyone sign the secrecy scroll, because now even those who didn't believe him couldn't betray him. "It's a good thing that most teachers like you," Susan said during their now rare moment alone. "Must be the famed Potter charm." "Worked on you, it seems," Harry murmured, twirling a lock of her hair around his finger. "Personally, I hope it'll continue working." "I'm still here, aren't I?" Susan nudged him, smiling. In all honesty, though, Susan wasn't taking recent events very well. She put up a brave front, but she hadn't been at ease ever since Harry had told her about the portkey. They'd even had a bit of a fight about Valentine's Day because Susan had insisted on staying inside the castle and cancelling the trip to Hogsmeade, obviously worried about Harry's safety. "Oh, we're still going to celebrate, but I have a new plan. It's going to be more personal. I don't need to leave the castle to be with my boyfriend, do I?" Susan had had the wisdom to dress her request as a whim that Harry was indulging, to celebrate Valentine's differently from other couples. She had organised a beautiful date in the hidden room, procured food from the house elves, and looked terribly hopeful that Harry should like her arrangements. Harry couldn't have done anything but capitulate. "Of course I like it. You're right. It's much better than Hogsmeade." He couldn't fault her for worrying about him without coming off as a jerk, or criticise her for being too nice when she gave up her dream Hogsmeade date for his sake. She probably wouldn't have enjoyed Hogsmeade anyway, if she had been fearing for their lives every second of the trip. And that was going to be a problem. Harry's life would never be entirely free of danger while Voldemort was around. Harry had developed a certain degree of fatalism, because otherwise he would lose his mind thinking of ways he could be harmed, or trying to plan for all possible contingencies. He was concerned that Susan was doing just that their relationship was lately bringing her more stress than happiness. That wasn't what he wanted for her. "I wish Aunt Emilia could do something," Susan said, frowning. "I'm sure she secretly believes that you know who is back, but she can't say so, or she'll lose her position, and that'll even be worse." "While your aunt's support would be great, we seem to be doing fine anyway," Harry said, and kissed Susan, hoping to sidetrack her. "Let's talk about something else, Like, have I mentioned that I really like your new perfume?" Susan's face turned a fetching shade of pink. "Today? Not yet, no," she answered primly. "However, you may begin singing praises to me now." Harry laughed and leaned in to kiss her again. There was no use in worrying. The true test would come on the 15th of March, and Voldemort's supporters at Hogwarts would expect Harry to go to the Ministry and withdraw the prophecy. On that day, Harry would have to evade their close scrutiny and avoid going, which he was not expecting to be easy. Thankfully, he and the twins had long ago worked out what Operation Distraction would entail, and it promised to be rather spectacular. Harry sincerely hoped that it would also prove successful. By the time March 15th arrived, Harry felt like he'd lived another month of the Triwizard Tournament. There was a task he'd been counting down towards, and he'd done his best to prepare for it, but ultimately it was as if he was swimming through a murky lake, while at the same time trying to outwit a few dragons, and Voldemort would be waiting at the end of this maze if he failed. "Everything's going to be fine," Hermione told him after breakfast. Harry wished her voice didn't quaver. "Yes, it is," he agreed, and marched off to his classes with a cheerful sense of doom. He'd been constantly surrounded by students since yesterday morning. Clearly Voldemort wasn't taking any chances. Malfoy did not seem to enjoy the role of Harry's faithful shadow, but he'd nonetheless managed to glue himself to Harry, figuratively speaking, and no taunts or threats on Harry's part could chase him away. Besides which, in Harry's year and in every class of his, there was still not Crabbe and Goyle. Harry wasn't sure how involved Parkinson was, but she would easily join the campaign just to express her loathing for Harry. He had such caring housemates. When the time came for the last lesson of the day, herbology, Harry's nerves were tingling with anticipation. Tonks was presumably already in the castle, or would be soon. The faster he got out of the lesson and somehow dodged Malfoy and company, the safer he would be. Harry and Terry were putting their gloves away, preparing to dash, when the greenhouse door opened with a dramatic bang. On the threshold stood a thoroughly demented-looking Professor Umbridge. "Potter!" she snarled, searching for Harry's face among the students and pointing her wand at everyone in turn. "I know it was you! It is always you!" Harry cast a non-verbal shield charm just in case. "Really, Dolores?" Professor Sprout interjected, sounding scandalized. "I'm sure there is no need to threaten the students." "Quiet!" Umbridge demanded, brandishing her wand. "You all, be quiet! Enough!" She swayed on her feet and leaned heavily against the door. "I see colours," she said suddenly, in a terrified whisper. "They are coming to get me. You are all coming to get me." "Dolores!" Professor Sprout looked truly alarmed. She made a step towards Umbridge. "No!" Umbridge screeched, shielding herself with her hands. "No! Don't come near me! Don't let them get me! Don't!" "Dolores, dear!" "I said no!" Umbridge shouted, and there was an ear-splitting explosion. Several girls screamed and students dove for cover as bits of plants and soil flew at them from flower beds next to the door. When the dust cleared, Harry saw Professor Sprout lying on the ground motionless, and Umbridge cowering in a crouch by the entrance. An odd, shimmering aura surrounded her. Students watched her in stunned disbelief. Nobody knew what was going on, and nobody had any idea what they needed to do. Harry knew what was happening, and he exchanged glances with his friends because they knew too, but knowing didn't help them, because they hadn't expected this either. Operation Distraction hadn't meant to start this way. Back in February, the twins had come up with the idea, and Harry had helped them with perpetrating the deed. He'd thought of involving Astoria Greengrass, and had given the Marauders map to the twins, but the Gryffindor Quidditch team was to provide the twins' alibis, and Astoria was to pull off most of the acting. The plan had been simple. Astoria would go into Umbridge's office, playing the naive little ministry supporter and relaying her suspicions that Harry Potter was hatching up a wicked scheme. Being a daughter of a conservative pureblood, in no way associated with Dumbledore, she would likely be believed. In the middle of her visit, however, a huge ruckus would be heard right outside the office, namely, the nearby suit of armour sailing into Moaning Myrtle's bathroom, crashing there, and eliciting a wail from the ghost. Umbridge, the control freak that she was, would go sort out the disturbance, leaving Astoria alone in her office for a few minutes. And that's when Astoria would change the mints in the bowl on Umbridge's desk for something much more interesting, and later a reverse exchange would occur to cover up the traces. "We're developing these sweets especially for Umbridge. Between you and us, Harry, we're going to call them the Mindfuck Mints." Fred and George had explained about combining scurvy grass with an Aztec fungus called Teonancatl, which for the ease of pronunciation they termed the magic mushroom. Apparently it had serious psychedelic effects. The Aztecs had used it for achieving all kinds of higher planes and trance-like states, but the twins had simply wanted to weird the living lights out of Umbridge. Harry and the twins had figured that timing this prank together with Harry's supposed departure to the ministry would be fortuitous for all, because it would distract Umbridge from spying on Harry and divert student attention, making it easier for Harry to slip away in the ruckus and change places with Tonks. Clearly the plan had worked, to an extent. Umbridge had to be under the effect of the mindfuck mints to act the way she was right now. However, her cornering Harry in the greenhouse was never in the original plan, and Harry was rapidly coming to realize that they should have made a provision for taking away Umbridge's wand. They hadn't counted what effects the mushrooms would have when combined with Umbridge's magic, and this shimmering shield around Umbridge? It boded nothing good. Not to mention poor Professor Sprout. "We should check on her," Harry murmured, pointing at the prone woman. Padma nodded. Harry made a cautious step towards Professor Sprout, keeping an eye on Umbridge. Professor Sprout had collapsed only a few paces away from her, so Harry would need to get reasonably close in order to check on the Hufflepuff head of house. Turning around briefly, Harry saw that all students were observing his movements with rapt interest, even Malfoy and his clique. The unfolding events had taken them, like everyone else, completely unawares, and they were right to be wary of surprises today. Harry made another step. Almost there. Trying to make no sudden movements that might set Umbridge off again, he reached for Professor Sprout, but then the luminescent aura around Umbridge wavered dangerously, folding in on itself and darkened in colour. Harry jumped back just in time before the shield lashed out, sizzling towards the spot where Harry had been. Crabbe and Goyle guffawed, and the sound seemed to rouse Umbridge. She lifted her head, eyes narrowed in malice. "I know you are here, Potter. I see you among my enemies, and, dear Cornelius," she waved her hand at Professor Sprout. "See what you did, Potter. You have worked so hard all my life, and you want to destroy everything. But I won't let you destroy me." Then she flinched violently. "I hear them," she said, eyes wide. "Cornelius! Cornelius, you must protect me!" Suddenly she burst into tears. Terry looked nauseous, and Padma awfully pale. After all, they had done this, or someone they knew very well had. And none of them liked Umbridge in the slightest, but to reduce a woman who prided herself on control to this snivelling wreck— well, even Harry's nerves were somewhat rattled by this display, although he had bigger problems on his mind right now. Time was ticking away fast, and he was still locked in the greenhouse. "Okay," he said, "we need to get out of here. I'm about to experiment a bit, so be ready." He sent a tickling charm at Umbridge. The moment the spell collided with Umbridge's shield, there was another explosion, a minor one this time. Then Umbridge let out a furious yell, turned towards Harry's group, and hurled a non-verbal fireball in their direction. Lisa Turpin screamed. The fireball hit Harry's shield, which shook at the impact. For a moment Harry thought it would give, but then the fireball fizzled out of existence. Then there was silence. "Shit!" said Terry. While they had been recovering, Umbridge became quite certain that a potted plant was her mother, and started rambling off a litany of her numerous faults. There was something about filthy half-breeds in the midst of that, but Harry wasn't paying attention. What if we all attack at once?" he proposed. "We can't attack a teacher," Malfoy said sanctimoniously. "That is against school rules." Throwing a glance at him, Harry saw that Malfoy was enjoying the situation. After all, the pro-Voldemort party had put so much effort into dogging Harry's every step today. It would be ideal for them if they could keep Harry confined to this room until Ministry officials came to collect him. "Umbridge is not herself," Padma retorted. "We can't stay here until someone finds us. It's not until dinner that people will realize we're all missing." At hearing her name, Umbridge stirred again. "Mudbloods and filth, polluting me, polluting all of us." "Professor Sprout needs urgent medical help," Harry said loudly. "We need to get out of here and take her to the infirmary." "I have always done what is necessary," Umbridge said, raising her voice to match Harry's. "I have never shirked my responsibilities. I have always served my country." "Professor Umbridge needs help too," Anthony said, clearly. "And Potter will pay for all he's done," Umbridge screamed. "And Dumbledore, and you, how dare you call yourself my mother?" She aimed her wand at the potted plant, and a jet of fire burst out of her wand, engulfing the plant in flames. Umbridge cackled. The plant exploded. "Not so long till dinner now," Nott said pointedly. "It will be safer to wait a little instead of risking our and Professor Umbridge's health. I'm not sure it's good for our health to be locked here with her," Harry countered. "Umbridge can't be strong enough to repel us all, can she?" "We should try," Padma said, and took aim. On the count of 3, Harry, his friends, and most of the dueling club members present cast simultaneous stunners at Umbridge. Then the whole class dove to all sides when a violent explosion rippled through the greenhouse. "What on earth is it with her?" Morag McDougal asked, peeking at Umbridge from behind the table now overturned. "Uncontrolled accidental magic," Anthony said, and there was a despair in his voice. "Whatever is wrong with Umbridge, her magic has gone completely haywire, and have you noticed that her shield seems to get stronger after our spells? How the hell is she doing it?" "Uncontrolled magic," Terry reminded him. "You just said." "Fuck uncontrolled magic. There was less than half an hour until dinner. Just when was Harry supposed to change places with Tonks? The prank had meant to debilitate Umbridge and distract the students. It had not been meant to lock Harry in with a class full of observers, hurt Professor Sprout, and possibly sabotage the Order's entire plan. "What about the windows?" Harry asked, addressing his friends. "Can we—" "Spell-resistant," Anthony said, quashing Harry's hope in the bud. "Are you sure?" Blaise pressed. "Yes," Anthony said, annoyed. "But you're welcome to try." Wasting no time, Millicent turned around and sent a bludgeoning curse at the greenhouse window. The curse reflected off the window at an angle and went speeding towards Theodore Nott. Indifferently, Harry watched him dodge, and then turned back towards his friends. Anthony looked to be deep in thought, Terry confused, Padma worried, Millicent brooding, and Blaise darkly amused. "What a hoot," Blaise whispered to Harry. "Dumbledore's scheming, Operation Distraction, mighty plans. All goes down the drain because Umbridge found herself a greenhouse. Unless, of course, someone had noticed her state and directed her to the greenhouse on purpose." Harry cursed under his breath, thinking furiously. He had no way to send a message. He considered the fake galleons Hermione had created, but they only allowed him to set a date and time for the dueling club meetings. Umbridge was blocking the only exit, and the mindfuck mint somehow had set her magic wild. Ideally, Harry also needed to escape without making himself appear suspicious. Then again, perhaps not everything was lost. Ministry officials were supposed to appear later. While it would be a close call, Harry would still have time after dinner to switch places with Tonks. Accomplishing that was more likely than escaping right now, anyway. By the time footsteps were heard outside the greenhouse, Umbridge had destroyed several more plants, hallucinated up the appearance of Cornelius Fudge once again, and launched another attack at Harry. Harry was just trying to catch his breath when the greenhouse door opened to reveal Professor Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall, and Lucius Malfoy standing on the other side. "Father!" Draco exclaimed in surprise, while Harry repressed the urge to let out a creative combination of curses. "Good evening, Draco," Lucius Malfoy drawled. He raised an eyebrow at the wreckage in the room as Dumbledore and McGonagall laboured to restrain Umbridge. "Mr. Potter," Malfoy added, once his gaze found Harry. His lips curled in a small smile. "It will be my pleasure to escort you to the Ministry of Magic after dinner tonight." Following his classmates out of the door under Lucius Malfoy's watchful eye, Harry was sure that somewhere someone was laughing.